Happy Friday. Welcome to another episode of Murders, Mysteries, and More. My name is Kaylee.
My name is Desi.
Be sure to like and subscribe, and don't forget to hit the bell next to the subscribe button to turn on post notifications. Before we get into these cases, we always encourage those who have useful information to any unsolved case, please report it to your local police and sheriff department.
Today we will be discussing two 411 missing cases. In case you haven't watched our previous video about avid hiker Kenny LeVeach, there is a link to the video in the description below for that. Missing 411 cases involve people who go missing on public land, rural land, or national parks. For the most part, their disappearances are not related to mental illnesses by any sort, but however, anything is possible.
With that being said, the first person we will be covering is 14-year-old Stacy Arras. So she went on a horseback riding trip with her father George and 6 other people, and this was on July 17th, 1981. Stacy is originally from Saratoga, California, and they were taking the horseback riding trip to the Sunrise Meadows area of the National Park Yosemite, which is, if you guys don't know, one of the biggest national parks in California. Okay, they rode for a few hours and then they got tired and decided to stop at some cabins. And Stacy shared the cabin with her father, and these cabins were located at Sunrise High Sierra Camp. So geographically speaking, this camp was above the shelf in Long Meadow, about 9,400 feet total in elevation.
That's crazy. But after she got in the cabin, she took a warm shower and put some sandals on and prepared to go for a walk with a man named Gerald Storrett, who was in his 70s. Her excuse was that she wanted to take pictures and her dad told her to switch into boots. However, she probably didn't. But her father did allow her to hike with him, so they probably knew him. So shortly after they left, Gerald needed to sit down. He was old and probably out of breath. But according to one of the tour guides, they said they saw Gerald sit on a boulder and then Stacy walked away. Why did Gerald allow Stacy to walk away?
I think the reason why Gerald decided to let Stacy walk away because she was just going to go to this lake, which, depending on how far away it was from the trail, he might have still been able to kind of see the view of the lake, so she would have still kind of been within his sight. Also, times were a lot different in 1981. Like, times were way different, so I think back then kids all the time would go on really long walks without adult supervision, so he probably didn't think much of it and thought like that nothing would happen and that in a few minutes after he had his rest he would go catch up with her.
But of course that did not happen.
No. So Stacy disappears, she just vanishes. When she disappeared, basically, like I said, she told Gerald she was going to walk to a lake. And then from then on, Stacy was never found. Her height is 5'5". She was wearing an off-white jacket with a white blouse and shorts with maroon and white stripes. She also had on gray hiking boots, a gold anklet, and a small pair of blue earrings. On her, she had gum, an Olympus camera, and possibly a pack of cigars, because according to some sources, they do say that she did smoke. And then she has blonde hair and blue eyes. Like part of her camera, the lens was found later on in a search. Important things to note, though, is we do not know exactly which lake Stacy was exactly headed to because none of the sources really say which one specifically. Now there is Tania Lake, which is 5 miles northwest of where her and Gerald would have been, or there's Long Meadow, which is 900 feet southeast. That's a flooded portion of the river. And then the most likely lake that she went to was Sunrise Lake, which is about 1 mile away. Out of those 3 lakes, which lake do you think Stacy was headed towards?
I feel like she was probably headed to Tanya Lake just because even though it was a little further, it might have been a nicer lake, and she could have already possibly went to Sunrise Lake at some point and decided to want to go to Tanya Lake. There also could be other reasons why she went over there, of course, but I feel like that might be the most likely one.
Interesting. What do you think happened to Stacy when she was well on her way to the lake?
I think that she possibly could have been abducted, harmed, or she could have possibly fallen at some point. She could have fallen off a cliff at one point, we never know. But something bad definitely happened to her. That's for sure. I mean, she's not alive, so she never returned.
And she could have gotten lost too.
Yeah, she could have gotten lost, and back then they didn't have cell phones, and she probably didn't have a map with her. She probably didn't have a backpack. Yeah, or a compass. So she probably did get lost and then succumb to the natural elements.
Yep.
But after this, Gerald had asked hikers if they had seen her. They told him no. So after that, the park authorities were contacted. The staff from the camp did offer to help search the national park. So the next day, 100 people did volunteer to search for her. And it was a mix of volunteers and search and rescue. And they searched for 11 days and searched 5 square miles, which, if you don't know, that's actually a pretty good big area to search, especially in a national park. But they did search grid by grid. They didn't find her, and even the helicopters couldn't find her.
Which is crazy.
Yeah, because usually, they can find somebody pretty fast that way. Right. Sometimes.
And that amount of how much they covered, too.
Yeah, it's a big proximity, for sure. Perimeter.
So now into theory. So it is very, very unlikely that Stacy ran away. The thing is, Stacy originally, before she put on her boots, she was going to go out in flip-flops. So if she was going to run away, that would not make sense for her wanting to wear flip-flops. Also, Stacy did not show any signs of mental illness, according to, anybody. Now, not saying that still can't happen. Now, the more likely thing that did happen to her is an abduction is very possible. First of all, Stacy is 14 years old. She's blonde, so there's some sickos out there, so I would not be surprised if someone did snatch her. Also, at the time in 1981, most people really didn't carry around cell phones or anything, so she couldn't really get a hold of someone if she was in danger or in trouble. Also, because of this, it makes Gerald a less likely suspect because he would have had no way to contact her after she went missing because he didn't have a cell phone. She could likely overpower him because he was at least 70 years old. But it is a little bit weird because he was not really named until 20 to 30 years after, and not every source says the same for his age. Some say he was 70, some say he was 77, so it is a little bit strange. Do you think Stacy was abducted?
I think it's possible. Her being 14 years old, there are, of course, predators and creeps and all that stuff out there, and they do like to hang around the national parks a lot of times, so it's very possible. And the fact that Gerald wasn't even named until 20 or 30 years later, and some sources can't even confirm exactly how old he is or anything like that, is very suspicious to me, at least. Mm-hmm. I think he could have possibly been involved in what happened to her.
Right.
Anything can happen, of course.
Right, and it depends, too, on the 70-year-old, because I know a lot of people say you can overpower them. However, if he ever worked in the military or anything like that, I mean, obviously he's going to be very strong, so she might not have been able to overpower him, if that was the case.
Yeah, a lot of old people are still strong.
Yep.
Depends on how old they are and how well they worked out, but they can still be strong. But other theories besides this one are that she was attacked by an animal, she drowned, or that she fell to her death. Dangerous animals such as bears, snakes, and cougars did, and still do, of course, live in California. Specifically for snakes, the North Pacific rattlesnake which can cause strong headaches, internal bleeding, and cardiovascular, and in some cases, death for those who are bitten. So if this was the case, she would have been very far from medical attention, and of course they wouldn't have made it in time for her to survive, even if they had found her or if she had alerted anyone. Cougars, of course, are known to live in California as well, and have maimed people, because that's what they're infamous for. But she also could have gotten close to the edge while taking a picture and ended up slipping and falling into the water and drowning. She also could have fallen off a cliff and died, unfortunately, because that's very common, especially in national parks. More particularly, of course, the Grand Canyon. A lot of people have fallen off and died. But if she was attacked by an animal, why didn't they find her body?
So, I think it's less likely that she was attacked by a bear and cougar, because they would have likely found, like, her body, and they would have found, like, the tracks from, like, the lions or the bear. However, if she was bitten by, like, a rattlesnake and she was in an area that's just, like, a little bit off the trail or whatever, and just happened to be away from, just, like, right outside of where they did their search and rescue efforts, that could be why they couldn't find her, because she just happened to be, like, a little bit outside of, like, that area. If it was, like, any of those animals, I would definitely say it would have been a snake. That would have been more likely.
Definitely. Do you think she fell off a cliff?
So I think it is very possible that she did fall off a cliff. I know, like, a lot of people, like, including myself, when we go and, like, take pictures and whatnot, like, sometimes you want to really get that amazing shot, and so sometimes you're not really paying attention to how close you are to the edge. Things can happen, and next thing you know, you have slipped, and, you know, if you, like, slip and fall off, like, a canyon or a mountain or anything, like, you're likely going to fall at least hundreds of feet, but most likely thousands of feet. And so, like, your bones are going to break and everything, and you're likely going to die. So I think it is very possible. And also, because we haven't really found her body, makes me kind of feel like that is, like, what happened to her.
I completely agree, but feel free to comment below what you think happened to Stacy.
Now, into our second case we'll be covering is Dr. Jim McGrogan. So, Dr. Jim was roughly 39 years old. He loved the outdoors. He was so fit, like, he completed in triathlons, marathons. He just had amazing physical shape. He was also really smart, because he wanted to go on a trip, because obviously, you know, anybody who's worked in healthcare, the medical field, it's not always easy working in that type of environment. So he was like, I'm going to go on a trip. So he chose to go on vacation in Colorado, which Colorado is well known for their beautiful mountains.
Yes, very much so. But he did take a skiing trip with his buddies, and he did take the avalanche course, the survival course, and he was well prepared for these. March 14th, he headed to Vail, Colorado, which is 9,000 feet above sea level, and their plan was to hike to Eisman's Hut, which they'd gain around 1,200 foot of elevation. They did have plenty of gear. They had blankets, water, food, GPS, and a cell phone with extra battery. And the weather conditions were nice. However, lots of snowfall recently, up to 30 feet, were off trail, but the trail was still maintained.
At the time of the hike, March 14th, 2014 or whatever, this was 8 a.m. in the morning. Dr. Jim was in shape, however, the people he was going with, not all of them were in shape. Around 10 a.m., the other people, they were just pretty much, like, tired, and they really planned this trip out well, because they had scheduled stops along the trail. And so when they reached the first stop, the hikers decided to take a break. However, Jim, being stubborn, his stubborn self, he decided he was going to trek ahead. When the hikers got to the next stop after their rest, they had no sight of Jim at all. At first they didn't think much because Jim was in shape and he took all those courses, so it would, knowing what all, like, how prepared he was, they pretty much didn't feel like anything could happen. After a while, though, they decided to search the trail because they didn't see him and call his cell phone, but there was no luck. And yes, there was cell service in this mountainous area. So why do you think Jim continued the trail without everyone?
I feel like he continued the trail without everybody because he felt like he could do it himself. He wanted to explore more without having to wait for everybody else, so he just decided he'll be fine. He has all of his equipment and that he'll just go by himself and be back in a reasonable time. But around 5:30, the authorities were alerted that he was not back, of course, so they sent 3 helicopters and searched 18 square miles for 5 days. They had dogs and they searched everywhere, but there were no tracks showing that somebody left the trail, and there was no signs of Jim. However, a big snowstorm had happened, so they decided to stop the search. But 20 days later, 4.5 air miles away, Jim's body was found. So why did it take 20 days to find Jim's body, and why was his body 4.5 miles away?
So I think one of the main reasons why it took so long is, first of all, even though the trail was very well maintained, outside of the trail, there was just mounds of snow, like 30 feet, so it's not always easy to search that. On top of it, as well, is like, after they searched for 5 days, all of a sudden a big snowstorm hit, and so that caused them to delay their search. Had that not have happened, maybe circumstances would have been different and they would have found his body sooner, but because of that, it made it a lot more difficult to find his body. And this is also a very, like, mountainous region, so it does take a lot of time to really search that whole area. And then why was his body found so far away that's a really good question. Obviously, he could have walked that, but at the same time, I'm about to go over how difficult that walk would have been, so that's kind of seems a little bit weird. But also, because there was a snowstorm, I guess maybe he could have gotten, like, blown across, I don't know. Like, it's just really crazy. Yeah, that question always has me stumped.
I kind of figured it was.
Yeah.
But it's a good question, nonetheless.
Okay, and then this is the reason why it'd be difficult for him to really go that far. So, first of all, his body was found on an ice shelf at Booth Creek Falls, which is a waterfall area. The skis were found off of his back, so that was basically indicating that he did not use the skis to get anywhere. On top of it, he would have had to travel up to 30 feet in snow, which is really insane. If anybody's ever tried to even go in like 5 feet of snow, you don't go very far fast. And what he would have had to do is he would have had to leave the trail, then go up a mountain, which he would gain 1,200 feet of elevation. Then he would have to go down the mountain again and lose 1,100 feet of elevation. Then he would have to cross a creek, then go back up another mountain and gain 1,200 feet of elevation, then go back down that mountain and lose 1,100 feet of elevation to be at the waterfall. And if you really think about that, that's really physically not possible to do on foot. I know anything can happen, but that, like, is really insane. I don't know how anybody could do that.
Me either.
Why do you think his skis were left on his back?
I think his skis were left on his back because he felt like he didn't need them. Maybe he just wanted to go on foot. Maybe he didn't want to use his skis. Maybe he's being lazy with his skis and he just wanted to walk on foot and enjoy the snow underneath his feet.
Right.
I don't know.
That's crazy though, because it would have been 12 to 16 miles total.
Yeah, I am walking that many miles. I'm sorry. Not on my feet,
And
not with
that's in
skis,
snow
nothing.
too. And, like, I know people can, like, walk that normally, but, like, in snow and, like, going up and down a mountain, that seems, like, insane.
You crazy for that, not me.
Yeah. That's the weird thing about this one.
Yeah, like, you must have some willpower because I fell showdown. And I don't know why he even went that far.
Yeah,
To be honest.
that's really insane.
Yeah.
I mean, I know, like, Waterfall has great views, but I'm sure it wasn't that great.
Yeah, no, you know what? I don't think so. I'm sure it wasn't that great either.
And that
I'm
was
sure
not
he
a
could have
great
waited.
idea.
No, that was not very smart of you, Doctor. Dr. Jim. Not
And that's
very
the weird
smart.
thing too, is like he's smart and like he's in shape, so this is just
He's a doctor. He should know better.
yeah.
Shame on you, buddy boy. Oh my god. Shame on you. But it gets even weirder at this point because when Jim was found, he did not have his coat on. It was in his bag. His boots were never found, but he had socks on his feet, and his pants were gone, but he had his boxers on still. And he also still had his helmet. His GPS was working, his cell phone was working, and they, after they found him, took him to the coroner to do an autopsy. He had a split snowboard that was on his back. He sustained severe head trauma, and he had trauma to his ribs, and he had a broken femur. They ruled his cause of death as a fall. But my question to you is, if, they were on this mountain, it had snowed. Of course, it's going to be some sort of cold and all that stuff. Why did this man not have half of his clothes on?
That's a really good question.
Why this man going up the mountain half naked?
So what could have happened, which we have talked about in other videos before, is obviously it was cold and it had snowed and all that stuff. So Jim could have, before like everything else happened, he could have been suffering from hypothermia. And so whenever some people are found suffering from hypothermia, they have this thing called paradoxical undressing. And so your body interprets that you being cold is actually you being hot. And so that's hence why he took his boots off, which we still don't know where they are. And that's why he took his pants off and his coat off. Honestly, the best explanation for that, unless there was somebody else out there. But yeah, I would definitely feel like that would be the most plausible explanation.
Man, crazy for that.
It is. I mean, if your mind's going crazy, you do some stupid shit.
I mean, that's true, but still, it just, I don't know, it doesn't make sense to me at all.
But there are definitely, like, with all of these 411 cases, the circumstances are definitely crazy surrounding them.
Yeah, they're strange.
So, like we said, Jim's death is quite strange considering the circumstances involving his case. The fact that he was found anywhere from 12 to 16 miles by foot in over 30 feet of snow with trauma on an ice shelf is just insane to think about. Also, the fact that his pants and his coat were off and his boots were never found is very bizarre. With that being said, feel free to put in the comments below what do you think happened to Dr. Jim on his hike.
And with that, thank you for listening to another episode of Murders, Mysteries, and More. Remember to always keep your eyes open because you never know when an avalanche is going to take you down.